Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Thouin. I'm a researcher, a relationship coach, and the author of What is Compersion? Understanding Positive Empathy in Consensually Non-Monogamous Relationships. And today I am thrilled to be with my dear and trusted colleague, Dr. Manijeh Badiee, who is a psychologist, a professor, and also a researcher at the intersection of polyamory, race, and culture. And I'm so excited to talk to her about compersion, about her new research, and just like her personal and professional background with all these topics. So, welcome, Dr. Badiee.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you. I love your book and I recommend it a lot. So I'm really honored to be with you today and to talk about these different topics.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. I feel like it's been a long time coming also of us communicating a little bit over social media and wanting to have a deeper research and, like this is going to be a hybrid, I think, between a research conversation that I might, want to use the data for and future writings and a lot of learning and sharing the wisdom that you have.
I
So would you
love that.
yeah, I know. I like hybrid things.
Yes.
Would you like to start with a little bit of your background personally and professionally in the field of non-monogamies?
Sure. So I am, as you said, Manijeh Badiee. I am an Iranian American, queer slash bisexual, neurodivergent. I have ADHD, cisgender, femme woman. And I am, let's see, as far as polyamorous, I've been polyamorous. I've been non-monogamous, I would say, most of my life. I just didn't have words for it, but I would say when I like really started to find the language and intentionally practice it was around 2009. So about 14 years that I've been officially practicing non-monogamy. And then it took me a little bit longer to get to polyamory specifically. And so it's been awesome. I definitely consider polyamory part of my identity. It's very much part of my values. And so it's very much part of my identity, just as being queer is part of my identity.
Beautiful. So you felt like always like non-monogamy as being part of your natural orientation to relationships?
Yes, definitely, because I feel like I pride myself on being present generally. And I always thought, well, if I do something with this person, then why does that interfere with this other person? Because I'm just being present in the moment. And so to me, my value of being present really aligns with that, as well as just freedom of, we should be to the extent that we can in society, because obviously that's different for different groups but to the extent that we can be liberated, I think I try to strive for that. Like liberation is a strong value of mine. And so part of that to me is being able to decide on what kind of relationships you want and how you want them to look like, and finding people that also are working towards that liberation. So in that sense, it's always been part of my values as well. My father's an activist in Iran, and he was tortured for his beliefs for a while. And so just that I feel like I hope I have his passion and drive, and so but he's always like aimed for democracy and liberation for Iranians. And so I think that that also definitely is part of my non-monogamy as well.
I love that. So it's not just like a spontaneous preference, it's also an integration of your own values, political and personal values.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, definitely values is a big one. It's interesting because, I just submitted a paper on BIPOC polyamorous values, and it was so fascinating because I think Poly, and I mean that's not that polyamory is unique in this way, but I can only speak for polyamory because I don't. That's the one that I identify with the most. But that it really is a value system as well. Like it's not just a relationship structure. Obviously, everyone, you always want to defer to self-identifications for individuals, but in general, I think it's a values for a lot of people. It's practiced as like a value structure of gender egalitarianism and just this like freedom and being obviously being um everything being ethical and all that as a foundation. So yeah, it's interesting how it's tied with values.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, as a side note, in my roadmap of what promotes compersion and what hinders compersion, the first factor, and I think it's just really, really essential for everyone to have that, is an ideological commitment to non-monogamous values and ideology. It's really, really hard to experience compersion if there isn't that sense of really like saying yes and buying into those values of, bodily autonomy and gender egalitarianism and ethics and transparency and respect and all these values, which I would love to hear more about your research, what you found are those values, especially with the intersection of racial identity. But yeah, I think that is a topic that is not discussed enough. I think in the world of non-monogamy is that values alignment being the foundation of it.
I love that's what you found and what a beautiful finding. And that doesn't surprise me because really it should be congruent to who you are, right? Like you hear about people going into non-monogamy under duress, and that's a very different situation than going in like freely and going in because that aligns with who you are. So that makes a lot of sense to me that you found that. That's really interesting. Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk about that now or later?
Let's put a pin on that because I would love to
Okay.
hear more about your professional entry into the world of consensual non-monogamy research and education and like what compelled you to become an educator and a researcher in that domain?
Definitely. So I've always been interested in just marginalized communities generally. My dissertation, my a lot of my work has been with racial and ethnic minorities, as well as queer folk. And same thing clinically, I've specialized in those populations, trans people. So I think, I've always had that interest. And then I guess I'm trying to remember how it first came about. I think, well, initially when I was on internship, so, for, as you know, like for a doctorate, you have to do a year of internship when you're done with a clinical or counseling psych doctorate. So I did a year of internship. And at that place, I was in a college counseling center where it was very, very sex positive, overall very just very social justicey, but oh boy, they were not good with non-monogamy. Someone actually said there that even though they knew that I was polyamorous and had been with my partner for years, they said, "Oh, I've never seen an example of a healthy polyamorous relationship." I was like, "What? You see me? What are you
Hello.
trying to say?" But so that's when I think I realized that there's such a need, that there's so much stigma for clinicians, for therapists, and these were psychologists mostly. So it's not like a specific degree or an issue with the degree. It's just that there's these general mononormative assumptions in society that therapists definitely have, and even just looking at the just the way that studies are framed in psychology, it's always, are you single? Are you partnered? There's never room for like any non-monogamy at all in the research or anything. And so I think I realized the clinical need then, and so that's when I really started to once I graduated, and then I started to work in California under my supervisor. That was an area that like my supervisor would refer people to me that were non-monogamous. So I slowly started to build up a clinical specialty, and then I got invited to do a chapter for the marriage and family. It's called it's a Sage Encyclopedia of Marriage and Family Therapy. I think it's what it's called. But that I got invited and they had a list of topics and polyamory was on there. And I'm like, well, hello. Like
Yeah.
in the encyclopedia that this should be there. So that
Mhm.
was like my first article about it. And then I got really interested in polyamorous BIPOC because my therapy experience was that. And then over through the pandemic, sorry, there's like intersections, personal
Mhm.
and professional, I guess, that I'm going
Please.
back and forth.
I
But
love that.
um in the pandemic, I went to this BIPOC polyamorous virtual group. And I
Mhm.
just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I've never felt so just accepted and just so safe and so embraced for all my identities. It was something that I felt like had been really missing from when I'd been in white polyam spaces. And so, but I didn't realize. And so, like, I really fell in love with that. And then I think it took me like a year or two. I created my own polyamorous BIPOC group. And then I started to do more research on polyamorous BIPOC. I wrote an article with Vita Sawyers
Mhm.
about the specifically Black queer femme and non-binary people's polyamory, specifically people that were content creators and influencers and thought leaders, essentially, and how they were really pushing um, pushing really amazing ideas forward that nobody was really talking about in the scientific literature. And then so yeah, and then decided to do research on polyamorous BIPOC, and so that's basically
Mhm.
how they sort of, and I think at first when I first was polyamorous, I mean, I wasn't out on social media, but now I am out on everywhere on including social media because I mean, I feel like for people that are therapy clients, it's like a safety thing. They know that, okay, this person has some knowledge base. And just to be, a person who I have the privilege to be out. I have, I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not going to lose my livelihood or anything. So I should be out.
Mhm.
So that's also another way that it sort of started out like a professional. I should do it professionally, but it's also a personal thing. Obviously, being out is personal too. So lots of intersections.
Oh my gosh, I love the tapestry of all of these intersections that you're describing, the personal evolution and the coming out as a polyamorous person and the evolution of your career, like really seeing the need out there and the lack of education and resources, even in spaces that are really progressive otherwise, like your university. I had actually the same experience. At my university, it was a very progressive place. We could talk about consciousness and psychedelics and just like transpersonal psychology and all kinds of things that were out of the box. But when it came to sexuality, everyone was assuming monogamy, and that was shocking to me. And it made me want to do this more, just like you. Like there was a sense of a thirst to fill that gap that was glaring and just like glaringly missing. So I'm very resonant, very much resonating with everything you're talking about.
It is wild, right? When you see like they're so progressive in everything else, it seems like, but then this one they're so it can be very, maybe rigid or just not even on people's radar
Yeah.
sometimes, you know?
I think it really speaks to how threatening the concept of non-monogamy is, to our identities, to our egos, to our sense of security in the world, in the kind of established fabric of society based on the nuclear family and the monogamous couple. Like it's the air we breathe. And until we really see it as just like another system of normativity that's been taught to us, that's not just an inherently natural thing that is natural to human beings, it's hard to really like see it. But then when you see it, you can't unsee it. And you're like, wait a second. This doesn't really work, like or this doesn't work for everybody at the very least. And let's dismantle the hierarchy of, who gets that kind of privilege in our society. Like monogamous couples getting so much privilege that single people or non-monogamous people don't have.
I
So,
completely agree with you. And also, I think it's the people have been traumatized by infidelity. And so they equate non-monogamy with unethical, I mean, it's, with this unethical thing that happened to them. Because I want to say, I mean, you probably know this better, but I think it's like the number one or two reason people divorce is infidelity, I think. Um, so it's obviously very common thing that people, sometimes it rewrites everything about that person. Like, oh, I didn't know this person at all, which I get it in some contexts because, if the person lied many times in order to cheat, but I do find it interesting that it does rewrite everything you know about a person. And I found that experience even with ethical non-monogamy with myself, with people that, sometimes they've known me my whole life and then they see me different because I'm
mhm.
non-monogamous. It's interesting that people really see it as like a moral failure,
Mm, mhm,
you
mhm.
know?
Right, right, right. There's just so much pain and historical pain, I think, associated with non-monogamy as well, with, like the gender dynamics where women historically have less power and have been the ones to sometimes like tolerate, like their husbands infidelity because they could not be in a place to choose. And I think as we're moving away, and at least like, Western societies where women are gaining power, like moving away from that paradigm of like women not being able to choose, there's a sense of like, well, we need to reclaim our power, and that means we don't want to be just cheated on, but also, do we want to be monogamous? Maybe not. Like it's a reckoning, I
Mhm.
think, with just like that history of pain and oppression at one level, causing like so much pain around infidelity, and now having to reckon with what does it mean to be authentic and empowered?
Yeah, that's such a good point. It is such a reckoning. And I do find it interesting, like that, I think once you realize, and people can do this at different stages of life, but when you realize like the story you've been given of, okay, if I just have this one person and I do follow these society rules, then I'm going to be happy. And I think a lot of times at some point people realize like, oh, that's not the case, and so I do agree with you that it's a reckoning, and there's choices that we've, like, I think more than we've ever had before for different genders, because non-monogamy has been practiced in so much of the world and still is, but mostly for men,
Mhm.
and so that is, it's very different now with different, with all genders really having access to it, so yeah, it's a reckoning.
And I think a good segue into compersion actually is that one of the reasons why I decided to focus on compersion in my research was that I find that compersion throws a wrench in the wheels of mononormativity because, a lot of mononormativity, the assumption that monogamy should be the only valid relationship choice in our society, kind of rests upon the assumption that jealousy is the only thing that we're allowed to feel in a case of non-monogamy. Like it's almost like the moral or the emotional justification of like, why would we want anything beyond monogamy? Because anything beyond monogamy can only cause pain, betrayal, jealousy, suffering. And when we actually document compersion, when we show that, hey, sure, there's jealousy, sure, there can be suffering, just like there is in other relationship styles, by the way, but there can also be compersion that sort of shakes the whole system of normativity to the core and says like, wait a second, there's this whole emotional landscape that we might not have thought about within mononormativity. So, yeah, I'm curious to ask you, what is your experience with compersion in your own kind of personal journey of non-monogamy? Has that been significant?
Yeah, definitely. I was the way I always try to know, like, when did I first something come into my consciousness? I go in my Gmail, which I've had forever, and I searched
Nice.
for
Keep
like
the
keywords,
record.
and I saw that I had first talked about it in a presentation in 2020. But I think I learned about it a little before that. I think it was maybe like 2018, 2019. Unfortunately, I was trying to remember what was the first time I heard about it, but I couldn't remember the exact moment. But I did ask my partner, like, hey, do you remember us when we first talked about compersion? Because he's also Persian. We're both Persian. So, he also, he was like, yeah, I remember you talked about it and you were so excited. And you're like, it has the word Persian in it. And I was really excited. And at that time, of course, conversion just meant the joy of like, your partner being with other people. And I remember it really resonated. And I don't think at that point I had had a chance to even experienced compersion yet, and I wouldn't for a while, but I think just knowing that that existed was really powerful. Like, wow, it seems so radical, to be happy for someone else's happiness. And I love that. And it really resonated to me because I do feel that like I get so excited for just for people that I love doing awesome things. And so to me it really just resonated, and joy is something that I really, try to like experience. I try to embody joy. And so I think it just really resonated for me. And then I would say, like, when did I first experience it? I mean, initially I definitely was jealous, but I would say now, I mean, now that, so I'm in two major, I'm in two life partnerships. Well, I have a
Mhm,
platonic life partner as well.
mhm,
But I have two romantic life partnerships, and we're in such secure place that I experience it pretty regularly. Like sometimes they joke that I get more excited about their date. Like they're both very like reserved people emotionally, so they're just like, oh, they don't get too excited about like new dates, but I'll be like, oh my gosh, how is a date? How'd it go? I get so I have to check myself because I don't want to be too much. I don't want to be like, I don't know, imposing my own emotions on them, but I do internally feel really excited for them. So it comes very naturally now. It didn't at the beginning, but I
mhm.
think as I like worked on my relationships, it sort of naturally started to come about. It was sort of this like lighthouse, in a stormy ocean that I'm like, I know I'll get there. I see the light. I'm not there
Oh,
yet.
oh,
So for
that's
me, it was kind of a process. It wasn't like automatic.
okay. So it evolved over time.
Yes.
Hmm. And what do you think allowed it to evolve? Like to have more room to grow for you? Like what are some of the factors that you would be able to identify as like, oh yeah, like what happened for you individually or relationally that made it more possible?
Oh wow, there's a few things. I think like on an individual level, I think just growing within myself, learning how to communicate in healthy ways, learning how to receive healthy communication. So learning just in general what healthy interactions should be, because I did not have an excellent conflict style prior to I would say prior to non-monogamy. I think it really forced me to work on that.
Yeah.
And And so I think just growing in within myself, in my own self-love and within my relationships as well. And also just being in relationships that were very loving and that fully embraced me. And, that there was this reciprocity there, which I didn't have in all my relationships. And so I think when that wasn't there, when I felt like it was maybe more one-sided, or when there wasn't as much room for me in the relationship, that's when I think I would experience. And I don't want to, like, I know they're not opposites or anything, but I think I was more prone to experiencing jealousy than compersion. So and sometimes I would experience both at the same time, but I think more regularly. I wasn't experiencing compersion consistently when I wasn't in relationships that weren't necessarily the most compatible for me.
Mhm.
So that was definitely a big one. And then also just like from a systemic level, I think when I've had to really focus on a particular goal, like for example, when I had to really focus on getting tenure and it was extremely stressful and there was a lot going on, like I wasn't even thinking about polyamory, let alone compersion. So I think being in a place where I feel very privileged to be relatively stable financially, I think that does help as well.
Mhm.
And knowing my neurodivergence more. So like with ADHD, people that's another specialty of mine clinically, but people assume that the hardest issue is attention. And yes, it is a struggle, but the motion dysregulation as a whole is much more of like, I think for a lot of people, that's the big issue. And then attention is a part of that because it's hard to like sit there and stay engaged. But I think just getting appropriately treated and medicated for my ADHD, that also really helped me in a more, and in that sense, I guess getting more emotionally stable rather than financially in that. So I think just stability, I guess that's really for me so important. I think it's like something that I admire people who they don't need stability. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Like I wish I could be like that, but I don't know
Mhm.
if it's my immigrant background, but being a first gen immigrant, I'm like, I need that stability to feel okay. So when I have that, it's like, okay, the compersion comes, the joy comes. And obviously the relationship piece. So I would say those are probably the two big things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm basically like stability and a sense of agency in both the relational and the personal realm. Sounds like it gives you like capacity to experience more compersion.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So,
I would love to hear. I mean, we have so many topics that we have on the docket, but I would love to hear about your research on the intersection of BIPOC identities and polyamory and values. Is that all one research project, or is values separate from the racial identity research?
oh, yeah, that's a good question. So, it's in the same data set. So basically, I collected data on about 400 polyamorous BIPOC, and there was different open-ended and closed-ended questions that were related to the meaning of polyamory, the as well as like values and what how their experience they feel it contrasts with white people that they've seen, as well as what has been their experience dating white partners and what's been their experience dating BIPOC partners, and then their sense of community too, and their therapy experiences and therapy needs. So it's basically breaks down into kind of three papers. The values one is the one I already submitted, and then the one I'm working on now is related to just what is racialized about polyamory essentially. So when it comes down to how it's practiced and like on the individual level, but then also at the relational level, like how is intimacy racialized as and then the community space too. Like how is that unique for people of color? So essentially that's kind of how it breaks down. But I feel like you had another question about it that I missed.
Well, I was curious to hear about, like the values, also like polyamorous values research. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about both, if you're open to it. The one that you already submitted about poly values, which is from the same data set with, was it all BIPOC individuals?
Yes. Yes.
Got it. So what did you find in terms of the intersection of BIPOC identities and polyamorous values? What were some of the main findings from it?
Oh, it was so fascinating. So, some of it is what like I think you would expect, right? So like ethical values, like for example, honesty and accountability, the things that we generally tend to talk about in relationships, we're also present in the data. So some of it is, things that we do know, but what I really thought was really amazing was the spiritual values came up. So that was really fascinating as far as like, and the way that I was defining spirituality was, being connected to something greater than yourself, as
Mhm.
well as being present, time where you're really present. So like there were some spiritual values about things that are like kind of Buddhist ideas of compassion, for example, right? Compassion is about just caring for someone because they are a person, not because they're good or bad or they've done whatever, because they're just a person and they deserve that, right? So that like mindful sort of acceptance, that mindfulness really came up a lot in the data, and that was really fascinating. And then just also the relational values that came up were also really interesting too. So there was a strong sense of like collectivism in the values that like is one big value, but then it shows up in lots of different ways. So that was really interesting. And maybe actually, now that I think about it, maybe relates to compersion too, the collectivism, because I think there's this sense of like are you want like you think about others, maybe
Mhm.
just as much as yourself. And so you really want them to be happy, right? And you really want them to be, so I think it sort of sets that stage for compersion, like that sense of collectivism.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I actually did a little bit of research on the intersection of compersion and race, and that's exactly what stood out to me. One of the few things that stood out was the intersection of between like cultures that typically come from more of a collectivist philosophy where, you want to take care of other people, as much as you want to take care of yourself. Like you share the not just the joy of others, but the well-being of others. Like there's this sense of solidarity, especially being part of marginalized identities, like the solidarity of it can promote compersion or just really like the mentality of it can lend itself more so than, individualism, where like most people who were born in Eurocentric worldviews like myself, like I was raised in a very individualistic um, culture and worldview, and I'm having to dismantle that to embrace non-monogamy.
that's so interesting because you strike me as very like collectivist.
Oh,
So
that's
you've really done a lot of, I feel like you've done a lot of unlearning.
Thank you for saying that. It's a work in progress, but I'm so glad that this is how I strike you.
Yeah, definitely. That is so interesting though. And I mean it makes sense because you are like what you found in your data about it being like more related to compersion because yeah, like you are really just seeing your people and your community maybe, and you're like, well, why wouldn't I want like this for my community also, like that's what I think about my partners. I'm like, they're so amazing. Like I don't want to keep them to myself. Like they could be out
Mhm.
making other people happy, Like I get happy for the people that they're making happy too, because I'm like, I know you're a good partner. Like, so it's awesome that like this other person gets joy from you too.
Right, right. That's amazing. So yeah, collectivism, like it makes sense that it would be one of the big values that stood out for you.
Definitely. And there's been people in like the research that have sort of analyzed like polyamorous texts and have found those themes, like in the major a lot of the self-help, not your book necessarily because this was written before that, but they have analyzed like some of just the mainstream like polyamorous texts. Luckily, also it's changed now with radical relating. There's other books out there that I think aren't as much like this, but I think for a long time that was one of the big critiques of the polyam self-help literature was like it's very individualistic, and that was always my struggle too when I would read stuff. I just thought like it seemed like the people are kind of pathologizing emotions and pathologizing jealousy when I come from a culture that is very emotionally expressive, and like I'm not going to not have big emotions. So to feel like you're always in the wrong because you're the one that has the emotions is also very white in my opinion. Like that is not just it's emotion, there's like emotional suppression, I think, and so that's also something that yeah, is different. But
Oh my gosh, yeah. I know. It's like, how do we deal with big emotions? It's such a cultural question.
yeah, and I think a long time like it was this was the this was the bad polyam person, the one that gets jealous and the one, but like you probably know this in research, what we know is you won't get to the higher emotions if you don't let yourself experience the harder ones, so like if you limit your like if you really force yourself to avoid all your jealousy or numb it, then that also limits your joy potentially. So like there's a lot of value, and as a therapist I know this too. Like I try not to have people avoid their emotions, but just to understand them and be present in them. So I think it's very healthy in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there should be a balance, shouldn't be like constantly yelling at people or something, but there is a balance. And I think yeah, and so like in terms of compersion, I think that's another thing that probably contributes to it for me when I have that freedom to just be fully myself and emotionally, not be restricted. Because I have been in situations where it's like, okay, you're the one that's causing the problem because you're the one that is like saying something, so it
Yeah.
is it gives me more freedom to experience compersion when I don't have that, when I feel like okay, I don't have to restrict or like make myself small in
Mhm.
this relationship or something.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yes, yes, absolutely. Like when there's room to experience everything, then there is actually room to experience compersion as one of those things. But if you're like, no, I can't experience certain things, then the whole system gets contracted. And it's like to me the mastery or like the trick, the alchemy of non-monogamy is to be able to experience those big emotions without weaponizing them. Because
Mm.
jealousy as it has an inherent kind of aggressive character, or like a protective character. I think if you really tune into like the energy of it, it wants to protect and potentially like be aggressive. And it's like, how do you actually like go back to the vulnerability of it so that you can express the essence of the pain without blaming, without attacking, without shaming yourself? It's not something that we learn in school. And I wish we did because that is a big, that's a big part of the human condition.
Yeah, no, that is such a good point. It's as you say that, I'm thinking like, You know how sometimes people will say, I'm not a jealous person. Like
Yeah.
they'll say that. And I'm always like, okay, maybe like I don't know. I feel like you never get jealous. But I mean, maybe I'm sure there's people that don't. But I think for me, I would say the opposite. I'm like, I am a jealous person because I am competitive. So like
Yeah.
I like to win. So like I think that's actually helped me in some ways because I have learned to deal with it in other contexts. Because what I will say when I'm even before non-monogamy, I think I had this practice of, okay, if I'm jealous of this person, what does
Mhm.
that say? Because it's trying to tell me something. Maybe that person is doing something that I want to do or some form of it, or, maybe. So I try to understand what it's telling me. And I see it as like a friend who is a kind of a jerk sometimes, but a friend who does tell me what's going on in a way. So yes, I totally agree with you. If we can start it as maybe like not that it has to always start as an internal process, but just like kind of look at it first, respond instead of react right away, where we sit with it and just try to understand. Because maybe it's something that, sure, we should talk about. And, but I know like for me, when I would feel jealous, sometimes it wasn't something that I needed to talk about, but I thought I did because I thought I have to share everything. So I
Mhm.
think just recognizing it, sometimes it's just, oh no, okay, I've actually heard this before. Or like I've been through this before and this person has reassured me. So like how can I use what they've said in the past? But yeah, I totally agree with you. It is it's an interesting emotion.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I love that, respond rather than react. And I think that's where like mindfulness can be very helpful in non-monogamy or, in life to help create a little bit of that gap where you don't have to just respond right away to every emotion that comes up. You can say, hello. What do you have to tell me today? What's going on? Let's take a beat. Let's have a cup of tea.
Exactly, exactly. Like sometimes I even encourage people to give like a big emotion a name, like, oh, Sue is visiting me, or like Debbie the Downer is visiting me today. Like what
Oh, yeah.
what is going on? But yeah, I agree. Like that mindfulness is so big, and there's actually some growing literature on that with non-monogamy I've seen. So it's very exciting to see that because I'm sure that that helps if because there's lots of research now on mindfulness as far as interpersonal benefits as well. And so it would be interesting to see, maybe even across relationship structures, how much mindfulness relates to quality of relationships because I'm sure that it can do a lot. It's I know for me like mindfulness has been pretty life-changing, that and self-compassion, which is kind of related. So and including like in my own non-monogamy too. So yeah, I think it's very powerful mindfulness.
Yeah, totally. So, gosh, I feel like we're jumping a little bit like all over the place, but it's so
Sorry.
fun. No, no, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be like keeping us all on track, but there's so many beautiful tangents. But I would love to go back to the cultural element, the intersection of identity and non-monogamy. And you mentioned actually like as an Iranian American, like there's this specific set of intersections. And I love that, yes, Persian is in the word compersion. So I'm curious if you'd like to share anything about that, the intersection of your Persian identity with non-monogamy.
Yeah, definitely. So, Iran is an interesting culture because there was a study done by the government where they found that there's more queer people. I think there was something like a little bit more than 10%, which was more than in the US. So it's pretty interesting. And this was on a government study. So, people were probably even less, they were more hesitant to say something, but it still was a pretty sizable percentage. However, everything is sort of hush hush.
Mm-hmm.
It's like something you don't talk about, that you don't talk about any kind of like thing related to pleasure or just that kind of, if it's like it's kind of accepted for men, but more if you don't talk about, like, nobody really talks about it. So in that sense, it sort of hindered me coming out on social media, just because I knew, like, once I did that, my family maybe was gonna, get questions or things like that. So in that sense, that intersection really made me kind of conceal it for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, which is very consistent with the research that I'm looking at now on the polyamorous BIPOC. Like, it's not that there's, there people of color are just as likely to be non-monogamous, but we're just not as out because there's more repercussions. So
Right.
for me, that did hinder that. But then what I realized ultimately was, I'm going to be out because I'm not doing it for the Iranian straight slash monogamous community. I'm doing it for the people that are in Iran that are non-monogamous and that are queer and that maybe can't say that. So it's also been like it was something that initially hindered me, but then it also like empowered me to be out and be visible. And I've gotten really good reactions from some people in Iran, like, and that's been really wonderful to see. Another thing is, like, we're a culture who is just obsessed with love. So like we love love, and it's one of the things we're really proud about in Iranian culture is our art, especially our poetry. So like there's Hafez is a great poet and Rumi is a great poet, and Rumi specifically, he had this spiritual guide that the love that he had for this person, I mean, it's very powerful. It's not like you know, I don't know, you can't really put it into any box, but he basically encountered this spiritual guide, and then like only for a short period of time, but then spent the rest of his life pretty much like writing poetry about him. And so that's also something that, it's like I have the little, because it's now published as a book. Um the Shams of Tabriz is what it's called. And so, like, I will open it up to a passage and just read about, spiritual love and like these other kinds of love that maybe we don't talk about as much. So I think that also is very much, part of my culture. And then also, I think just the way I practice polyamory is very family centered. I feel like I have, my anchor partners, and we definitely consider each other family. And it feels really amazing that way because Iranian culture is very, very family oriented. And so, there's a lot of, yeah, there's a lot of like similarities to how I want my life. I just want two. I proposed to my lady friend, so we're gonna get married next March. But I'm like, I just want two married partners. That's all. It's just one
Yes.
small
Why
difference.
not? Yes, that's amazing. Oh,
Yeah, so I think that's also how it relates, and just like the collectivism that I was mentioning before, definitely, because that's how I was raised to think about my community, to think about the people around me and how they're affected. So I think that also affects how I show up in my polyamory.
I love that so much. And I love that you brought up the spiritual aspect of love and just all of this, like this beautiful ancestry of Iranian poets like Rumi and Hafiz, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. Um, but I also
Close
absolutely
enough.
love that poetry. And I always, felt that non-monogamy and particularly compersion is a very spiritual phenomenon, or, like there is this expansiveness of love, this sense of love not being limited, which is one of the essences of spirituality in my book. It's the idea that, not in my book, but like in my worldview, that love is not limited. And we have so many constructs that try to force us to, limit it to one person or one circumstance or one context. And if we can just really like take these blinders off, we can be so much more free and liberated and ultimately in touch with a sense of the divine or a sense of spirituality that transcends like our egoic minds.
I love that. Yeah, like something greater than ourselves. Exactly. Like it is it, and just releasing that ego, is so so huge. Like so yeah, I really love that. And just releasing those, those constraints on ourselves, right? Like that's it's such a lifelong process but so rewarding.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
By the way, this is my cat Lucy.
Oh, hi, Lucy. Oh, so cute. She was inspired by the conversation about limitless love.
She likes compersion.
Conversion.
You need a cat meme.
I actually saw like someone gave me a greeting card that had like three cats like just like spooning each other, and the word was compersion. It's meant to
Oh,
be like,
that's so
I'll send you a
cute.
picture. It's so beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that is so cool that yes, you come from a culture that's obsessed with love.
Yeah, yeah. It is pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah. My people are suffering right now, but there are like we're so resilient too, and such a passionate people and so yeah.
Mm.
But
And may love win. Oh my gosh.
I know. I know. I know.
What else did you find in your recent study, the one that you just like submitted for publication? Tell me a little bit about
One on
what
values or the one on the racialized polyamory?
the one on racialized polyamory. What were your research questions for that and what did you find?
So my questions are essentially in what ways is polyamory racialized for a BIPOC? And so the things that I mean it's sort of in three major domains is the meaning of polyamory is one domain. So like the way that BIPOC sometimes um experience polyamory can be different because of things like values, because of things like, values alignment, and just because of ways that they have learned about relationships and, those kinds of things. So that is definitely a way. And I'm trying to think what's a major because I'm sort of at the first stage of analysis, but I have some preliminary findings. So like for that one, I think what I've found. So, one thing that I think is a powerful just number is out of 400 people, if you add like asking them, is their experience of polyamory different because they're BIPOC? And 94% said yes. So, that's
Mm,
a pretty substantial number, that 94% said yes. And then if you break down, obviously, all the responses, it's even less of a percentage because people give multiple reasons why it's different.
mhm,
Um, but I would say the major differences are like, yeah, how they might practice it, how they might either go towards hierarchy or not go towards hierarchy, depending on what they're sort of looking for. And then the racialized intimacy is also really interesting with looking at the ways that they felt in relationships with in terms of polyamory. So sometimes they felt like they were tokenized,
mhm,
like this person wanted to add a person of color to their polycule or something. So that comes up.
mhm.
Sometimes there's objectification and sexualization that comes up, particularly with Asian women. That comes up a lot, like being fetishized. And so when they go to polyam spaces, sometimes they're very fetishized, or even within their own polycules sometimes.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and so there's that piece. There's the visibility piece of finding it like this is much, they find it much harder to be visible a lot of the times.
Hmm.
And so that's also a major piece of, I already have this and this and this working against me. So why would I come out about this as well? So that was another one.
Right.
Um,
For their loss of privilege that, maybe they can't afford.
exactly, exactly. And I'm diving into the difference between white and BIPOC partners, which I think is really fascinating because if you think about it, you know, one fascinating thing about studying people who are non-monogamous as adults is like you're seeing adults date versus like maybe other studies. I'm not sure, but I would assume a lot of them are done on like teenagers because usually it's like teenagers or very young people dating. But polyamory studying it gives you the chance to study people who are dating as fully formed adults, right? So they have a lot more experience and things to draw from. They've seen patterns. And so one thing that I think is different is those same structures of white supremacy that could show up, like are showing up more with white partners. So they find that, for example, they don't feel as heard with white partners. They don't feel like their perspectives are as important, especially if they have a white metamor,
Mhm.
in comparison. So there's sort of the positionality that they're in within the relationship, the access that they have to a serious relationship can sometimes be less with white partners. And then in general, dating BIPOC partners has been very, very rewarding, although there's other challenges, but as a whole, people are talking about that as being a strong connection. And some people had really great experiences with white partners too, if they were like, had really worked on themselves and they were really trying to unlearn things and they really made space, then that was really powerful and healing.
Yeah.
But generally, it was like sometimes not the best experience for people. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's really fascinating to just see like when you are an adult. So like if you're in your 30s, 40s, now you've had maybe 10 years of dating, 20 years of dating under your belt. Like what do you see as the patterns, right? Which I think is really fascinating. And then the community spaces, not feeling as represented in community spaces, not feeling as much, exposure for themselves. That comes up a lot. So it's very powerful when they can see other examples of BIPOC talking about their non-monogamy. That's a very powerful thing. So
Yeah.
so yeah, lots that's just like barely scratching the
Yeah.
surface. I'll have to send you the paper
I would love
once it's all done. But yeah, I'm excited to like go really deep into it and just see, what are some of the themes. Oh, and then the liberation, the resistance, right? So
that.
compersion I know came up as resistance in,
Mhm.
like as you talk about in your book. And so polyamory itself, compersion as resistance against these norms that have been put on us by white supremacy and mononormativity and cis heteropatriarchy and all these things like that this is a way to sort of reclaim ourselves and a way to connect with ancestors too. That's also coming up, which I think is really, really beautiful. And maybe it goes back to somewhat of the spirituality piece of like connecting to someone greater than yourself or outside of yourself, And so I think that's really also very powerful, aspect of the data, the resistance aspect of it all.
Right, right, right. I had a wonderful interview with Evita Sayers actually about that, and she kind of coined that term, compersion as resistance, and like not wanting those oppressive systems like white supremacy to control not only like the structure of her life, but her emotional reality of like, like internalized racism, feeling and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but not wanting to feel less than internally, and not feeling like she has less to give, and therefore compersion being this kind of abundance of generosity, of emotional generosity, being an act of resistance. I'm like, no, I can live in a state of abundance. I have plenty of love to give, even though I've been told that I have less.
Yeah, yeah, it's so powerful them talking about it. Absolutely. And so maybe not directly related to compersion, but sort of that same idea, of like I've had all these constraints put on me and I'm refusing to take those on. And I'm living a life of abundance, and I'm living a life that where I am truly loved and I am truly, fully seen. And so yeah, I love that idea because I like that you do mention in the book too that it can be restrictive. The oppression definitely can
Mhm.
affect compersion, right? Like I was talking about earlier, like with the financial stability. But
Mhm.
also I love the idea, as Vita mentions in your book, like of it being resistance too. And so yeah, so that's a really exciting part of the data that I'm like, ooh, yay. I can't wait to like dive deep in it. And there's some really like amazing quotes too. But that I'm like highlighting different quotes. I'm like, okay, I gotta pull this one out. But yeah, it's really awesome. It's a very awesome data set.
I love that. A lot of the themes you just mentioned also remind me a lot of Love is Not Colorblind, the book by Kevin Patterson. That,
Mm-hmm.
fetishization and exoticization. These are hard to pronounce words. But ultimately feeling fetishized because of an identity, and feeling marginalized because the lack of representation in the polyamorous communities. Like these are all really inhibitive factors. And yet, like it sounds like you were kind of drawing like a map to, like what might cause BIPOC to have corrective experiences or healing experiences within polyamory and with partners and metamors versus experiences that feel almost like confirming of the systems of oppression that they are already in. Like, I don't know if that resonates, but like the idea that with some white partners there can be something beautiful if the white person has done their work and they're in a way that partnership can offer a corrective experience.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Yeah.
sound like?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, like a corrective emotional experience. Yeah, it could be healing for sure. It could be healing like this person, maybe I've never had a white person really truly make space for my emotions before. So it could be healing like, okay, this person is right there with me. And I think that's part of, because I teach multicultural counseling, which is where we talk about, the biases that can come up for therapists, and we talk about race and lots of different, sexual orientation, lots of different aspects of identity and how they can show up. And one of the things that I see is, there could be a lot of defensiveness when these topics are brought up, especially with whiteness, because I feel like that one's not talked about a lot. But what I like to remind them, as future therapists, is that like they can be so healing. Like the white therapist, if they have really worked on themselves and they have, really made that space so they're not imposing any biases on clients, they really make that space, like it could be so powerful and healing. So I think it's the same kind of idea, like, but if you're defensive and if you immediately go up here instead of like listening with your heart, that creates this immediate disconnect. And then like then the person of color will disengage a lot of the times, and so that's where the problem comes in. But it's like if you can feel it with us, you're one of us, like if you can really be there emotionally, not
Mm.
just from a cognitive perspective, like then that really is so powerful.
Mm. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for voicing that and articulating that because I take that in personally as a white person who practices coaching with some BIPOC clients. And, I feel like ultimately, like what the piece of wisdom you just dropped is valid for every person who walks into the office. But like tenfold with someone who has historical trauma with whiteness. Like there will be
Definitely.
no healing possible if we stay at the cognitive level, because then we're just sort of
Exactly.
objectifying and, we're still imposing agendas on our clients, which can feel like not healing at all, probably the opposite.
Exactly. Well, and that's part of, the white supremacy as we were talking about earlier. For it to really have been established in the US, there had to have been this sort of like dehumanization of all these other groups for it to really be. And part of that is also like the imposition of emotional suppression, right? And so that really like I think it's just so disconnecting, because in a lot of BIPOC cultures, like emotions, not all of them, but emotions are often more freely expressed. And so when somebody immediately like sort of goes up here when you're sharing something that's from the heart, it's just it feels like such a disconnect. And I mean, I see it similar to other groups like with like I work with a lot of trans clients. I'm cisgender. I'll never understand what their experience is like. I don't know what it's like to be harassed in a bathroom or to be worried constantly about being harassed in a bathroom, for example. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I can't try to learn and try to make space and try to listen. And will I ever truly understand? No, but I can hopefully be a safe person and use my privilege for good, and be there emotionally, for people, and rather than, again, just going into your head. And it's very well meaning. I mean, sometimes it's not, I'm not saying, I think a lot of times nobody's trying to disconnect or, diminish what the person's saying. But unfortunately, that is what happens. It's like intent versus impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. It's been so rich, and there's been so many amazing avenues, like between talking about your personal experience with non-monogamy and coming out and your experiences of compersion over time. And then your professional experience, really filling the gaps that you were seeing back in school, like in terms of wanting to provide resources and education to the non-monogamous community, the interweaving of the personal and the professional, and then the cultural and racial aspect of that journey, like what you shared about your personal experience, but also your amazing cutting edge research that you're doing with BIPOC populations. And that is just such innovative contribution to the field. I just want to really thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You inspire me. You're so amazing. So you're doing wonderful work as well. So thank you for the work that you do.
Of course, thank you. It's fun to be in a space of not knowing the answers. I think like when we do research, I mean that's the point, but also I think our field with non-monogamy, like it is so uncharted, it is such a young field that it's actually quite easy to discover something really brand new. Like it's easy to ask a question that hasn't been asked before and to go ask people in the field for, like experiences and make those contributions. I'm really happy that we're colleagues in that field of discovery and it's mostly about love, which is the best topic on the planet.
Oh, yes, yes, it is. It is absolutely, absolutely. Well, it was such a pleasure. And yeah, it was a wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for all the thoughtful questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Badiee. It's such an honor. And if people want to learn about your work, where can they find you?
Sure. So I'm on all platforms. I'm Dr. Badiee. So just DoctorBadiee. Well, on Facebook, my page is, I think, Dr. Badiee PhD, but that's the only one. But like on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, it's Dr. Badiee. So yeah, come find me. I try to post about polyamory and especially polyamorous BIPOC. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope
Thank
you have a
you.
beautiful rest of your day. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Bye.